When looking in Sefer Bereshit at the narrative progression of God promising Avraham the land of Eretz Yisrael, there's a glaring practical difficulty that arises for Avraham. God clearly sets forth the end result of Avraham becoming a great and prosperous nation in the land, but doesn't dictate the means of how Avraham is supposed to acquire this land that is already diversely inhabited. Without a clear action plan, Avraham must rely on his ethical instincts and faith in God's word. There is a great example of how Avraham's interpretive choices and the silence after God's promise play out in a discussion of the quarreling between the shepherds of Avraham and Lot in Parshat Lech Lecha. Rashi brings a midrash from Bereshit Rabbah that teaches that the shepherds were quarreling because Lot's shepherds were wicked and were intentionally grazing their cattle in the fields of others. Avraham's shepherds, noticing this theft, rebuked them, provoking the quarrel. To justify their actions, Lot's shepherds said, "The land has been given to Avraham, and he has no heir. So Lot, his brother's son, will inherit the land, and therefore this is not theft." This is the orientation of Lot. What has been promised to us is for our taking. The property rights of the land's current inhabitants do not have to be considered in taking what has been promised by God. Why then did the shepherds of Avraham consider this to be theft? The Midrash continues and said that the next line in the Chumash, "and the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land," comes to refute Lot's argument. This teaches us that as there were already other people using the land, it would be stealing to take the land in such an aggressive manner without acquiring it legally. These conflicting postures towards the people of the land follow Lot and Avraham later on as they negotiate with the residents of Sodom and Hebron respectively. Just as Lot's shepherds felt they were entitled to take from the Canaanite and the Perizzite fields, when the Malachim come to visit Lot, the people of Sodom feel entitled to take Lot's guests from his home without his consent. The Torah seems to be subtly telling us that it is not surprising that someone so inclined to taking property by force would find himself in a city surrounded by a people threatening violence. In contrast, at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parshat Chayei Sarah, Avraham comes to be in the city of Hebron, seeking to purchase a specific cave, the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, from Bnei Chet, the people of the land, for the burial of his beloved wife Sarah. In a scene whose text has many structural parallels to Lot and the Malachim in Sodom, Avraham displays his righteous character in a deeply respectful and legally contractual choreography of the purchase of the Ma'arat HaMachpelah from Ephron the Hittite. God being noticeably absent from the entire exchange, Avraham must rely on his ethical instincts of warmth, fairness, integrity, and playing by the laws of the land. In this way, he is fulfilling God's promise to him in a way that is agreeable to Bnei Chet. The first words Avraham says to Bnei Chet identify himself as a ger toshav, a resident and alien, which voluntarily takes on a legal position without rights or entitlements. Even though Bnei Chet recognizes Avraham as the elect amongst them, addressing him as Adon, Lord, an acknowledgement of his power and influence, Avraham does not speak to them as their superior. Rather, Avraham bows twice low before Am Haaretz, the people of the land. This is a rather low position in the hierarchy of Tanakh. When Ephron finally offers Avraham a price of 400 shekels for the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, an exorbitant amount of money according to the tradition, Avraham accepts without hesitation to make clear that the deal is fair and not contestable. Finally, Avraham conducts this entire transaction at the city gates, in the hearing range of all who enter the gate of the city. There's another midrash in Bereshit Rabbah that asks what all the inhabitants of the city were doing there. Rabbi Pinchas teaches that Bnei Chet heard of the righteousness of Avraham, so they all locked up their doors, their homes, and businesses, and went to bestow kindness upon him. Rashi interprets this midrash even further to mean that they came to attend the funeral of Sarah. Even if the people were just there to serve as witnesses to the land purchase, the contrast to the people of Sodom and their interactions with Lot could not be clearer. The relationship between God and Avraham rests on two pillars: the promise of the land and God's trust in Avraham as a righteous person. The only hint the Torah gives us for why Avraham is chosen to receive the land is found in Parshat Vayera, when God prepares to inform Avraham of the impending destruction of Sodom and Amorah, saying that Avraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the ways of God by doing what is just and right. La'asot tzedek u'mishpat. In looking at paths that come from Lot and Avraham, the Torah seems to be teaching that Avraham's choice to act with tzedek and mishpat in his interactions with Bnei Chet and other peoples of the land are exactly the traits that make him trustworthy to settle the land. In contrast to Lot, who represents the promise of the settlement of the land without the moral fiber of righteousness and justice. These same choices echo in our world today, which is still trying to find the best path to walk without direct guidance from God. In the debate over contemporary settlements in Israel and the Palestinian territories, so many have resigned themselves to the path of Lot, thereby treating all of our holy sites as if they were Sodom. Lot's orientation has become the norm for both the radical left and radical right, asserting that the Jewish people must make a choice to have only the land or only their ethical standards. It is easy to write off the one-sided voices within our midst, but Chazal take the temptation of following the example of Bnei Lot seriously. It is actually not so crazy to want to have a black and white interpretation of ownership of land or ethical standards. But Chazal come down on the side of Avraham, pointing us to an ideal that neither the radical left or the right seem to think is possible. Hebron is the city where Avraham chooses to display to the world his highest standards of tzedek and mishpat in purchasing the land that his descendants will receive. Even today, many journey to Hebron to remember and honor Avraham's legacy. But sadly, Hebron has become a city of conflict and violence, enacting a paradigm of ownership that seems closer to Lot and not Avraham. As we have learned, the truest interpretation of God's blessing of settlement in the land of Israel is not always the most obvious one. I invite us to challenge ourselves to strive to be worthy of this land and this holy city by not compromising on tzedek and mishpat. This is what the biological and spiritual descendancy of Avraham is all about.